June 1972 is an important date for you and for the whole Watergate affair. We need to examine or delineate very closely the events of that day. What are all the things that happened on June the 19th?
I called Dean, who was just back from the Philippines, and said, what's been going on here? Because that's the damage control person in the White House. The Office of the Counsel looks after problems of this kind. I said, who are these people? What's the implication for the president? He said, well, I don't know, but I'll find out. And he set to work.
I got in the office, there's a call. John Dean wants to see you. He said, come on, we'll go for a walk. And we walked out, and the sidewalk was kind of swarming with people. So we just discussed the pleasantries of the day, so to speak, until we could get behind the building into the park. And we sat down on a bench. And that's, when we really had started the substantive conversation. And I asked him, I said, are you the Damage Control Action Officer? And he said, well, yeah. He said, I think you could call me that. And I said, well, it's important, because if you are, you've got to be told everything that is to be exposed. So I relayed to him exactly what had happened.
I was told about it afterward by Dean, who said that he'd had a meeting with Liddy, and that Liddy had accepted responsibility for the burglary at the Watergate, and that it was a political operation, and that, as best he could tell, Dean, nobody in the White House was involved. Later that morning, Dean called on Charles Colson and asked him about Howard Hunt, and reported to Colson that he, Dean, had decided that Hunt should flee the country.
Dean came in and I said, where's Howard Hunt? He said, I've ordered him out of the country. I told him to get out of the country.
And he said, by the way, where's Howard these days, Howard Hunt? And I said, he's lying low. The reporters are after him. And he said, well, for that reason and for the reasons you've just been telling me, referring back to the Ellsberg stuff, he said, I think it's best that Howard leave the country. And I said, well, we could probably arrange that. I said, his family's already over in Europe on vacation. It would not seem out of the ordinary if Howard were to go over there and join his family. And he said, good, have him do that. He says, today, if possible, right away.
My reaction was, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This guy is wanted now. You can't, you're obstructing justice. You can't do this. You can't send him out of the country. You better stop that quick if there's still time. And he walked over to the telephone next to the sofa in my office and picked it up and made a phone call. I don't know who he called. Turned around and said, I think I've got it turned off.
While Colson and Dean were meeting, Hunt returned to his office at Mullen Company and informed his boss, Bob Bennett, that the White House had ordered him to leave the country. Bennett, now United States Senator Robert Bennett of Utah, recently confirmed Liddy's version of the story.
So I walked into his office, and he was very agitated, and he said, the White House wants me to, I can't remember now whether he said get out of town or get out of the country, but one of the two, till this all blows over, and I'm leaving now. And John Dean will be in touch with you with some money for my wife. And I'm sorry, I've got to go.
Later that afternoon, I convened a meeting in my office to try and find out who Howard Hunt was, where he was. Was he working in the White House or not? Had people from personnel, had his personnel records, had Colson come, had Dean come. And we talked about Hunt and his office and his safe, what to do about the contents of his safe. So I asked the personnel people to get into that safe and for Dean to take custody of its contents. And at that time, Colson said to Dean, did you get Howard Hunt back? Well, now that's the first I had an inkling that Howard Hunt wasn't on hand. Dean said, yes, I think so. He went over to my telephone, came back and said, yes, it's all taken care of. He's back.
I do remember that Howard would say to me, call John Dean to get me a lawyer. Call John Dean. I was not about to call John Dean. I was not about to call anybody in the White House. I was so naive at this point. I thought the White House wasn't involved.
The real issue, as far as I was concerned that day, the 19th, was, is anybody around here in the White House involved? Or is it strictly a political thing that the committee to re-elect is responsible for? And I kept getting the answer back from Dean and from Kleindienst, the Assistant Attorney General, and others, or I guess he was Attorney General by then, that nobody in the White House is involved. Well, I felt very comfortable with that. We could keep the president insulated from this problem.
So John Dean misrepresented the facts to you.
As it turned out, he did. There was White House involvement, and it turned out that Gordon Strachan knew there was going to be a break-in in advance, and he's on the White House staff.
What can you tell us about him?
Gordon Strachan's a very bright young man who's a lawyer in Utah and a loyal, church-going, God-fearing, upstanding pillar of the community who was Bob Haldeman's right-hand man for political operations.
Periodically, I was to report important political matters to Mr. Haldeman. As to the subject of political intelligence gathering, however, John Dean was designated as the White House contact for the committee to re-elect the president.
And he knows a lot that he's not telling.
I went over to the White House. Actually, it was to the old executive office building. And Dean was already out in the hall waiting to intercept me. And he was very nervous. It was clear he did not want to be seen in my presence. And we were walking back up 17th Street, and he said, I had to know something right away. Did anybody in the White House know? And I said, well, Gordon Strachan knew we were going back in. Because when Strachan was chewing me out about how this stuff isn't worth anything, I gave him the same story that McCord gave me, and I said, there's going to be a repair mission. I said, he knew we were going back in, but I don't know whether he knew when we were going back in. And he said, Strachan knew. I said, yeah.
What didn't you know at this time that you needed to know?
I needed to know that Dean had been involved in the planning of this political espionage, and Gordon Strachan was involved.
Now, when you came back to meet with Mr. Ehrlichman after Mr. Liddy had mentioned Strachan's name, you didn't tell him about that mention, did you?
I didn't tell him anything about Strachan, no.
Right. In fact, you intentionally withheld that from him, did you not?
That's correct.
And he kept the information to himself, didn't inform those of us in the White House who had some responsibility for the matter. And we adopted a line that nobody in the White House was involved, which didn't happen to be true.